some really amazing gifts in this program that he's in, and fill him full of knowledge and wisdom, and more than anything with your spirit. And so we just ask that you bless this time. We love you. We need you. Amen.
We got it. Ready to get the camera rolling, or we good?
I already hit play on this.
All right, good.
Okay, good morning. I'm Reverend Larry Fry, a pastor of the Mulberry CME Church in Lincoln, Georgia, and a doctoral candidate at Liberty University there in Virginia. And my cognate is urban ministry, and my micro project is community in unity. Today's workshop entitled The Dynamics and Dangers of a Multi-Ethnic Church. Our presenter is Pastor Shane Paget of Warren Baptist here in Grovetown, and we want to thank him for this opportunity to listen today. Thank you so very much.
Well, good morning. I want to thank you for taking your time out of your day to be here at 11 o'clock today. And thank you also for answering some questions and providing feedback and wisdom. I'm no expert in multi-ethnic studies. However, I believe with a collective thoughts that we all can have together and experiences, we can kind of wrestle down some really good insights in this area. So I'll proceed with our time with us dialoguing through questions that you received, as they will be used as a guide for us in our today's discussion. With saying that, I would love for us to get into the first question, and it is this. It is, how would you define multi-ethnic church? How would you define a multi-ethnic church? How would you define it?
I would define the multi-ethnic church as a church that's, I guess, is reflective of, in my opinion, reflective of the community, like the community that they're in. It reflects like the demographics of that community. So if it's like if the church is heavily one race or another, like it should reflect that. But also, if the area is like a mixed race place, it should reflect that. If it's a community that has a lot of children, then the church should have a lot of children. Vice versa. If there's a lot of elderly people in that community, then it should be reflective of the area. That's what I would think.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It reflects the diversity in which the community and the church exists. Yeah.
Lorenzo, I have your question, and I have your answer to that question. I just want to read it because I thought it was really good. Not to pick on you, but I love your insight. You said, to me, multi-ethnic church means a church that consists of members who come from various different cultural backgrounds. This can be distinguished by skin color, but also simply by the environment that one has been nurtured in. It's not just about whether or not everyone looks the same, but they do have similar or different behaviors in worship while listening to a preacher or while interacting with others. Do you want to give any insight to that?
Yeah, I think that the way that I look at just when I hear multi-ethnic church, I just see people who come together for one reason, and they have a foundational similarity of, they come to worship and they come to hear the word, but the way that they receive and the way that they, I guess you can say, pour out in different ways look a little bit different, and then it's almost kind of like you're bringing different flavors into one bowl, if that makes sense.
Yeah, kind of like a melting pot.
Yeah, so I would agree completely with what you're saying, Lorenzo. I had the opportunity to pastor a very diverse church in Swaziland, in Eswatini, and so for us, one of the unifying factors was English. There were churches that spoke in Siswati, there were churches that spoke in Afrikaans and some in English, but for us, what unified us as a people, obviously Christ and word, but was English. And so we use that as a unifying factor, but when we look at diversity, we had lots of different people of different skin color. We had people who spoke English, who spoke Afrikaans, who spoke Siswati, Zulu, so many different types of languages. And not only that, like the cultural elements of it, but was a denominational factor, diversity in denominational upbringings and understandings of scripture. And so when you have all of these kind of differences of cultural upbringing, denominational upbringing, it kind of with one unifying factor of desiring for growth in understanding the truth, growth in unity, and seeking to be a light in the community by in spite of our differences being unified. It's a pretty amazing thing, and it gives a picture of the gospel in action, and how in spite, like I think of Ephesians in chapter 2, where he talks about the reality that we're all of these different people, but yet we are one in Christ. And then later in Ephesians he talks about being unified and growing in unity together in spite of your differences. And I see that as being an aspect of the church.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? All right, we get into some meat. This is what I love this question, and it was actually the third question that was sent, but I'm going to kind of do it as a second. Is what are the benefits do you see in a multi-ethnic church? What are the benefits you see? What are the benefits you see?
Well, I think it best reflects God's original design and intention for us as human beings, as image bearers on this earth. I think when you have a diverse, multicultural, multi-ethnic church, it reflects that of heaven. And that is God's ultimate perfect design. It's harmonious and it's beautiful in every way. And so, and not only that, I think from a very just seeing God's design being so beautiful is that when you have a diverse church, you also have the diverse gift sets that exist within each people group in every culture, and we love that. I mean, we love everything about that. Even in our own lives, we love all the things that exist within our community that bring about the multicultural, multi-ethnic. That's something that we love and we enjoy to do, because I think God created us to love and enjoy and exist in those environments. And so it just reflects heaven, and that's what it should be. And that should be a desire of ours, ultimately.
Yeah. I'm 100% agree. Anybody else? Love to.
Yeah, I think it sets the stage for growth and even more importantly, just for sanctification, because I think that when you have different cultures, there are good things and there are bad things. And so you don't know what's bad in your culture until you've been exposed to another culture. And so you don't know, and you also don't know what your blind spots are until you've been exposed to another, I guess, type of people, or maybe you've had this framework or this mindset that you've kind of just been married to, and it's not really your fault, but it's because that's what you've been exposed to. So when exposure happens, then it creates the stage for sanctification, for growth, and just to learn from different cultures. And that can be, from a just simply a social sense. That could be from, it can vary in different ways. And I think there's so many different areas where you can learn from others, where they have been brought up a different way. And then you could also, through grace and through humility, expose those blind spots to each other so that you both can, or I guess, both groups can continue to grow and to be conformed more to the light of Jesus.
Yeah, and I think that's why when you go on a mission trip, you take something back from that culture, that group of people,
Absolutely.
and you leave changed, and you go, man, I'm not the same. Obviously, you experience the power of God, but also you pull something from them, and you go, man, I like that. It sharpens you. It makes you stronger as a person. Who else would love to?
Yeah, I'd say one thing it does is it kind of checks your heart. Like if you have multi-ethnic church, and what I mean by that is you have differences, and oftentimes in our culture, difference is seen as opposition, and it's not true.
That's good.
Difference is like sharpening you. It can sharpen you, and also makes you think of like what unites us at the end of the day, you know. And it can check your heart if I have to look like this person, act like this person, and the cultural things to get along with them and to love them as Christ, and I don't understand the gospel. And so the gospel unifies us under the banner of Christ, not like these cultural differences. And so I see it as like a big sharpening tool as well, to like get along with one another and to love as Christ did. Not Christ doesn't love us because we look like him, you know. Christ doesn't love us because our culture is like him. He loves us because he's Christ. And so I think it's just sharpening too. So.
Yeah. Anyone else? Love to know. Yeah, I get that sanctifying you, making you conform to more like Christ in his image, loving what he loves, marching and moving, all those things. What else? Because that is and heaven's gonna be that way, right? So, what else? Is there anything else that anybody would like to roll in? All right, the next question is the opposite. It's what problems, or if we had to like kind of change that word problem, I'd put struggles. What struggles do you see play out when pursuing a multi-ethnic church?
So I think even in the wording, there's issue, because if that is our pursuit, then we're pursuing the wrong thing. That should be a multi-ethnic or multicultural or diverse church. It should be the result of pursuing the right thing. Ultimately, like it should reflect the community you're in, because we're pursuing God, we're pursuing His purposes, His plans, and seeking to live that out in the community. But the problem comes when a church decides that is your pursuit, to pursue a multi-ethnic church, because then our whole mindset, our whole focus is the wrong thing. Yes, I mean, our desire should be to grow and to look like the community that we're in, and that diversity can be amongst, because oftentimes we look at that diversity as, skin color. When you can have a church full of white people or African Americans or Hispanics, and it can be diverse in culture. I mean, here we look at this church and we have diversity in color, but we also have a diversity amongst the people who are of one color. I mean, because we have people from all over the country, and there's a diversity in there. And that's looking like the community that we're in Grovetown. It's diverse because people are from everywhere, from the base. And so if our pursuit was simply diversity, then our hearts are in the wrong place. But when we are pursuing God and we are inviting people and we are loving to our neighbors, and we are, no matter the background, no matter the color, no matter anything, like when we are just loving our neighbors as God has called us to, then we will be, ultimately, God will grow that church in that way. And so our pursuit has to be Him, has to be God. And in that, the church will grow as He desires for it to grow. That will ultimately, if we're loving our neighbors, it will reflect our neighbors. It will reflect those we're around. And so, to me, that's, even in that question, there's danger in the question. And
Yeah, and Stephen, I think that you would agree with this, that, it's not to neglect intentionality.
For sure.
Okay, that was the thing I was on piggyback.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that you're not intentional, you're intentional and you invite everyone, no matter, race, color, gender, and you, treat them with love and kindness, because that's what God has called us to be as, they are fellow image bearers with us. And, we're hospitable, and we build each other in love according to Ephesians 4. And, but if your sole aim and your pursuit is to be a multicultural, whatever church, then I would say that you've missed the mark. Because if you're building up Christians that love the Lord and are surrendered to His will, the natural byproduct of that will generate love and hospitality and a genuinely brotherly, sisterly love for everyone, no matter what. That's something that emanates out of a true Christian, a true mark of a believer, according to Scripture.
Yeah.
So I agree, but I would also disagree on the point of like sole pursuit, like first pursuit, first love, Jesus, absolutely. After that, I kind of like, I think if you look at it like a marriage, right? And in a marriage, you're called to pursue like a godly marriage, right? And if you know in your marriage, the two of you don't communicate well, right? That is a way that you've been shown, like my marriage doesn't look like a holy marriage in the way we communicate. Then I'm going to pursue like good communication. And I'm gonna put practical things in place to communicate well. So, like, and it wouldn't happen through, well, if I continue to pursue Jesus, my wife continues to pursue Jesus, eventually the natural byproduct is we'll communicate better. Like, that's somewhat true, but there are also practical steps that have to be put towards that to move in that direction. So in the same way, like, if we continue to like love like Jesus and truly be Jesus and pursue Him, then like we will become a more loving people and naturally pursue our neighbors. But there also are practical steps that have to be put in place in order to pursue that, because we're called to pursue holiness. And what we just described as like holiness in the church setting is a multi-ethnic church. So we're in some sense called to pursue that holiness. And so there, in that sense, I think there would be practical steps that we have to put towards it.
What do you mean by holiness in the church being multi-ethnic, as that being holy?
Well,
In the sense.
well, I guess I'm saying like we just talked about how like a multi-ethnic church is God's ultimate picture of what the Big C church is supposed to look like. That's what heaven's supposed to look like.
For
That's
sure.
all, we're saying these things as in like that is this holy picture, this set apart thing, this like beautiful thing that the Lord desires. And so like, if we are to emulate that here in our worldly little C church, then there's some pursuit that has to happen.
Yes, I agree completely. But with what you said about the diversity of that church, and I agree, it's not a disagreement, but is to look like the community that God has placed you in. And so as we are in our communities, in the different areas that we are, and they're like, we, in our pursuit of God, pursuit to live as He has called us to, in the communities that He has placed us, like, yes, Warren Grovetown, but also, if we live, wherever you live, I know you just moved, or you're moving, where I live in Grovetown, where Corey lives in Evans, and where you live in Canterbury Farms, like, in those places, as we are living out as God has desired us to, with our neighbors, as the church intentionally equips the people to go out and to be the hands and feet in the communities to all people, no matter if male, female, African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, and as we equip the church to do that, wouldn't it naturally grow?
I don't think it would. I think there's a part of it that would happen naturally, but I don't think we would get there naturally because there's sin involved. you know?
Mhm.
And
So are you talking more like color, or are you talking
just
more?
in anything, like whatever, like even if whether we were talking about sex, color, like it doesn't matter. Like there's like sin involved, and I think our relationship, like with sin, it's like our relationship with the Lord is that we pursue the Lord, and then the Lord, he brings like sin he shows us, he reveals sin to us. And then there's a part, like in a relationship with the Lord, as you grow, the Lord is calling you to actually apply discipline to flee from that sin. And so there's practical work put into it. And like, so pursuit is Jesus the whole time, always, absolutely. But there are also practical steps that are put in, like spiritual disciplines. And so there's like effort that is applied. And so there's the pursuit of Jesus for a church. I think it would happen naturally that you would be loving and you would reach out to these people, but then there's those practical steps that have to be put in place. There's actual intentionality that has to happen. And y'all said intentionality, which like there's agreement, but I think there are like legitimate steps that have to be put in place and almost like enforced so we can get over that hurdle of sin, because things haven't stayed this way naturally for, years. It's not like all these churches around the world aren't pursuing Jesus. Like they're pursuing Jesus, but they aren't, the practical steps is what's missing. Or at least that's my opinion.
Do you know what those would be?
No.
Yeah.
No idea.
And I think part of that sin issue is even thinking, because in our church in Swaziland, there were great divides. I mean, massive divides between Swazi churches, Afrikaan churches, Anglican churches, white churches, and so one of the things that we were intentional about was continually encouraging people to invite those who were different.
Yeah.
Who they thought, because the original, it would be easy to look at someone or who was visually different, but also who was raised different. Because like amongst the white people in the culture that I was in Swaziland, you had Afrikaners who were white South Africans or white Swazis or from different places. But then you had English people who were white English South Africans, white English Swazis, and they were very different, and there was divide between them, and so for a white English Swazi to invite a white Afrikaan Swazi was a big deal, and the initial heart reaction would be like they would not want to come. They wouldn't feel comfortable in an English-speaking church. And I know that's different. That's a different level or different dynamic than here. But part of the intentional side of things of living out how God desires for us to live out to our neighbors is even inviting those who we think in our minds wouldn't come because they're different. And so, and I guess that if you want to look at that as being a potential step, but that's a part of being intentional, and part of loving your neighbor is those who are obviously different than maybe the majority, or this would be out of maybe what we think is their comfort zone, or even our comfort zone as inviting people, is getting over that hurdle in our minds and in our hearts. And whether we think they would say yes or no, it's like loving and inviting, and then having a church environment that when they come in, it's like their family, no matter what. And if we live in that way, if as a church, if we function in that way, it will grow naturally. And I guess you could look at that as a step, but that's an element of sin that where Satan is trying to speak to our hearts about this divide is too big, this gap is too big between you. And I'll tell you, like an Afrikaner coming to our church was a huge deal. being English speaking. And the church grew immensely in Afrikaan attendance. It was incredible, actually. And so, you know, as we get over that hurdle in our hearts, and as we give that to the Lord, you know, that breaks down walls and barriers, and that can naturally be there.
And I think one of the difficulties is, you know, you can, and it comes back down to a heart issue again, because you can go out and you can be super intentional and you can put disciplines in your life to invite people to your church. But if you have a body of believers that sees color,
Yeah.
then they come in and they don't get talked to, no one sits next to them, no one greets them, no one invites them to life group or small group. And so you've been super disciplined or super intentional, but your body of believers is toxic. And so it comes down to, you gotta have a culture of people within your church that loves hard
Yeah.
and loves deep
Yeah.
and loves the thing that God loves, and the things that break God's heart, they break their heart. And so, you know, I think about that too, even with our church. It's like, man, we have to make sure that we're teaching people to love deeply and to love human beings and to care deeply for them. And that's, yeah.
I would also like add, I agree. I would also add, like, no matter what you teach a church, when they sit down on a Sunday morning and they look up at the stage and the representation that's there is one demographic, it doesn't matter what you say, the church isn't living it out. So I think a lot of churches, like basically the equivalent of affirmative action, like in the church world, needs to happen. Like not to check a box, but for the sake of, like, if we want to look, if we love diversity and we want to look like like God's model of the church, if we want these things, then like I think that's one of those steps that like you have to take, that is like an actual, like an aggressive step, a thing that you go and do. I think it's almost like, it reminds me of people saying, like, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. Like I'm trying so hard to, it's like, I think the majority has to be trying to work themselves out of the majority. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to work myself into the minority group. That's how much we want that diversity. That's how much we want that difference of thought and to look like the heavenly church.
So
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I agree, but it depends on how we define diversity. Because diversity, as we've said, isn't just color.
Yeah.
And so there is great diversity up there.
Yeah.
It may not look like it from visually, but I know, like, there are many military people who are not from here. And so there is great diversity, and so it depends on how we define diversity as well. And I agree, like, you know, we have to seek to emulate what we desire, but then we have to also be like, okay, so but what is our definition of diversity?
Yeah.
And be okay with how the Lord grows the church in that as well, in our intentionality in seeking to represent the community and seeking to grow in what the into a greater picture of what the church looks like. And so I agree, but then we also have to look at, well, what is that diversity to us? Because, I mean, the obvious one that is apparent is how people look, obviously. How people look. That is the obvious, like, that's diverse up there when we have people of different races that are up there. But if we were to take that aside and everyone was in the world would look the same, we would look up there and there would be great diversity. And so it just depends how we look at it as well.
Yeah, we're gonna have to, our time is running out, but I wanna say this, is that, I think that question for us, should be something that we have a pulse on, so that we don't lose sight on what the primary is. So we don't find ourselves in a trap or a snare or anything like that. I feel like in 23 years now, specifically in the CSRA Augusta area, I've seen the church, the local church, in the midst of struggles and trials and all the things, err on the side of trying to do what they think is right, and by doing what they think is right or fixing things, they've caused more problems and forgot about the mission of God and glorifying the Lord, and because of that, the church just falls apart. And so we need to keep the main thing. I think is accountability for us, because the chief goal is about God's glory. That is the goal. It is to bring God glory and to be about His mission. And with that, our time is run out. And then I'm gonna open the floor. We can keep talking. So thank you guys for being here, and thank you. All right. So, I want to give you a second. So go.